The taste of copper filled Marlo Ashcroft's mouth before she realized she'd bitten through her own lip. October 14th, 1889. Midnight. The Crow Mansion on Fifth Avenue stood like a mausoleum dressed in wedding flowers.
I have
300
proof of
guests
your
had departed
lies.
an hour
What
ago,
is this
their
madness?
champagne-soaked
Stop this
laughter
at
still
once!
echoing in
The
the
truth
marble
will
hall.
be known.
They toasted the union of
could
the
this
season,
be?
the destitute baron's daughter marrying the
can't
railroad
bear
magnate.
it.
The perfect transaction. Beauty and bloodline exchanged for cold hard American cash. Marlo stood alone in the master bedroom, still wearing her wedding gown. 20 years old. Brussels lace worth more than her father had earned in the final decade of his life. Seed pearls sewn by hand across the bodice, each one a tiny prison of iridescent light. She stared at the letter in her trembling hands. The paper was expensive. Crane and Company stationery watermarked the kind Damien Crowe used for business correspondence. The handwriting was sharp, angular, masculine. No flourishes, no warmth, just black ink carving words into white fiber like a knife scoring flesh. Marlo. The transaction is complete. Your father's debt of $487,000 has been cleared. You are now Mrs. Damien Crowe in name. That is sufficient. I required a wife with impeccable lineage for my Senate campaign. I do not require a trembling virgin in my bed. Lady Seraphina Vane understands a man's needs. You do not. You have the mansion. You have an allowance of $10,000 per annum. Stay decorative. Decorative. Stay silent. Produce an heir when I decide to visit you in a year or two. Do not follow me to the Greystone estate where Seraphina resides. Consider yourself furnishing. See, Marlo read it once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. Furnishing. She'd spent 6 months preparing for this night. 6 months of fittings and etiquette lessons and her mother's whispered instructions about wifely duties. 6 months believing that even if Damien Crowe didn't love her, he would at least respect her. That marriage meant something. That she meant something. Furnishing. The letter slipped from her fingers, drifting to the Persian rug like a dying moth. For a long moment, there was no sound in the enormous bedroom, except the ticking of the Ormolu clock on the mantelpiece and the distant rumble of thunder. A storm was rolling in from the Atlantic, the kind that turned Manhattan streets into rivers of filth. Then Marlo's hands moved to her mouth. Her fingers came away red. She'd bitten her lip hard enough to draw blood. The pain was distant, abstract, like something happening to someone else's body. She looked at the crimson stain on her white glove. The blood was spreading, soaking into the silk like accusation. I am not furniture, she thought. The words formed slowly, each one a stone dropping into dark water. I am not an ornament. I am not nothing. But what was she? Her father, Baron Cornelius Ashcroft, had gambled away everything but the title. The shipping business gone. The estate in the Hudson Valley sold. The investments liquidated. When the creditors came knocking, there was nothing left but Marlo. 20 years old, educated virginal, with a family tree stretching back to the Mayflower. Perfect merchandise. Damien Crowe had paid the debts. All of them. In exchange, he'd acquired a prop for his political theater. The self-made railroad baron needed a respectable wife to soften his rough edges, to prove to New York society that he wasn't just another vulgar industrialist. He needed her name, her bloodline, her silence. He didn't need her. Marlo walked to the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger. Pale skin, auburn hair pinned so tightly it made her scalp ache. Eyes that looked like they belonged to something that had stopped breathing, but hadn't yet realized it was dead. She reached up and began pulling the pins from her hair. One by one, they clattered to the floor like spent bullets. Her hair fell in waves around her shoulders, dark and wild. Then she did something she would never have imagined herself capable of an hour ago. She raised her hand and slapped herself across the face. Hard. The crack of palm against cheek was shockingly loud in the silent room. Pain exploded across her jaw, sharp and clarifying. Her lips split wider. More blood. It ran down her chin, dripped onto the white lace of her bodice. She slapped herself again. And again. Because if she was going to bleed tonight, it would be by her own hand, not his. Not anyone's but her own. The face in the mirror stared back, eyes bright with something that wasn't quite tears. Red bloomed across her pale cheek like a stain, like proof of life. Marlo turned away from her reflection. She walked to the mahogany wardrobe and pulled out a heavy wool cloak, men's style, probably left by some previous occupant of the room. She threw it over her wedding dress, not bothering to remove the gown. There wasn't time. There was only the sudden, urgent certainty that if she stayed in this house one more second, she would disappear completely. She would become the thing Damien wanted her to be. Furniture. She grabbed nothing else. No jewelry, no money, no carefully packed traveling case. Just the cloak and the rage burning in her chest like swallowed coals. Marlowe walked out of the bedroom, down the grand staircase with its crimson runner and gilt railings, through the entrance hall where wedding gifts were still stacked on tables, silver crystal things she would never touch. The night butler, a man named Finch, appeared from the shadows like a specter. Mrs. Crow, his voice was hesitant, confused. Is there, may I summon a carriage? No. But madam, it's raining. You cannot possibly. I have no husband, Mr. Finch. Marlowe's voice came out steady, cold, a blade wrapped in silk. Therefore, I have no wedding night. Therefore, I am going wherever the hell I please. She pulled open the heavy oak door herself. The rain hit her like a physical force. October in New York was not gentle. This was not the clean rain of pastoral paintings. This was the rain of industry, of coal smoke and horse manure and human waste all mixing with water and falling from a sky the color of old bruises. It soaked through the wool cloak in seconds. The wedding dress underneath grew heavy, the lace train dragging behind her like an anchor. Marlowe didn't care. She walked down the steps of the Crow Mansion and into the deluge. Behind her, the door slammed shut with the finality of a coffin lid. She had no destination, no plan. There was only the movement, the rain, the need to put distance between herself and that letter, that room, that life. The streets of Fifth Avenue were empty at this hour. Gas lamps flickered through the downpour, casting weak yellow light that barely penetrated the darkness. Marlowe's satin wedding shoes, dyed to match the dress custom-made by a cobbler on Madison Avenue, were not designed for walking. They soaked through immediately. Her feet slipped on the wet cobblestones. She kept walking, past the dark windows of mansions belonging to Astors and Vanderbilts, past the shuttered shops of milliners and jewelers, past the Cathedral of St. Patrick where she'd said her vows 6 hours ago, promising to love, honor, and obey a man who considered her decorative property. The rain was coming down harder now, a true storm. Thunder cracked overhead like the sky breaking open. Lightning illuminated the street in stuttering white flashes. Marlowe turned south, driven by some instinct she didn't understand. Away from the wealth of Fifth Avenue, away from the manicured safety of her gilded cage. She walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Time had become slippery, unreliable. The neighborhoods changed. The buildings grew shorter, dingier, the streets narrower, the gas lamps fewer and farther between. She was somewhere near Hell's Kitchen now, though she didn't know it. The kind of place where debutantes didn't venture even in daylight, even with escorts. Marlowe's legs were shaking. Her corset pulled tight, for the wedding meant to give her that fashionable 18-inch waist was making it hard to breathe. The combination of exertion, pain, and oxygen deprivation made the world tilt and swim. She stopped, leaning against a brick wall, gasping. The rain drummed against her skull. Her hair hung in wet ropes. The wedding dress was no longer white. It was gray, brown, black, the colors of Manhattan's streets. Marlowe closed her eyes. This is insane, she thought distantly. I'm going to die out here. I'm going to collapse in an alley, and they'll find my body in the morning, and Damien will say I was mad hysterical, that I wandered off in a fit of female weakness. Well, well. The voice came from the darkness to her left. Marlowe's eyes snapped open. 2 men emerged from the mouth of an alley, no 3. The third one hung back, barely visible in the shadows. They were rough-looking, working-class clothes tattered and stained. The smell of gin and unwashed bodies hit her even through the rain. The one who'd spoken was tall, thin, with a gap-toothed smile that made her stomach turn. Looks like a little bird that flew away from her nest, he said, stepping closer. His eyes traveled over her ruined wedding dress, the lace, the pearls. A very rich little bird. The second man, shorter, broader, with a face like a clenched fist, pulled something from his coat. A knife. Not a gentleman's knife, small and decorative. This was a docker's blade, rusty and mean, the kind used to cut rope and gut fish and open men when necessary. That necklace, Fistface said, pointing the knife at Marlowe's throat. She'd forgotten she was still wearing it. Her grandmother's diamond choker. 50 carats, worth more than these men would see in 10 lifetimes. Take it off, he ordered. Slow. Marlowe's hands moved to the clasp at the back of her neck. Her fingers were numb from cold, clumsy. The clasp wouldn't open. Faster, Gaptooth said, moving closer. Or we'll take it off ourselves, along with the head. The third man laughed from the shadows. A wet, phlegmy sound. Marlowe pulled at the clasp. It stuck. She pulled harder. The necklace broke. Diamonds scattered across the wet cobblestones, bouncing, rolling, disappearing into cracks and gutters. A fortune in stones gone in seconds. You stupid! Fistface lunged forward, knife raised. Marlowe's heel caught in the hem of her ruined train. She fell backward hard, landing on her knees in a puddle that was probably equal parts rainwater and sewage. The impact drove the breath from her lungs. Pain shot through her kneecaps. She looked up gasping and saw the knife descending toward her in the flickering gaslight. This was how it ended then. Not in a bed as an old woman, not in childbirth like so many of her peers, but here in the filth of Hell's Kitchen, murdered for diamonds she no longer even possessed. Marlo closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, Father," she thought. "I tried to save us. I tried." Clack, clack, clack. The sound of boot heels on wet stone. Deliberate, unhurried, moving closer. "I would rethink that." The voice was male, deep, not shouting, not threatening, just stating a fact. The way you might tell someone the time of day or comment on the weather. But there was something in it, something that made Fistface freeze mid-strike, the knife still raised. Marlo opened her eyes. A man stood 10 paces away, silhouetted against the weak light of a distant street lamp. Tall, very tall, broad-shouldered. He wore a long, dark coat that hung to his knees, the collar turned up against the rain. In one hand, he held a black umbrella closed despite the downpour. He held it like a weapon. No, not like a weapon, as a weapon. "This ain't your business, Governor," Gaptooth said, trying for bravado but not quite managing it. "A lady on her knees is everyone's business." The stranger took a step forward. The light caught his face for just a moment. Square jaw, dark hair plastered to his forehead, eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against tan skin. He looked like he'd seen violence and returned the favor. Fistface made his decision. He lunged not at Marlo anymore, but at the stranger. What happened next took perhaps 3 seconds. The stranger sidestepped. Smooth. Economical. No wasted motion. The umbrella came up in a tight arc and connected with Fistface's wrist with a crack like Breguin's wood. The knife went flying. Fistface screamed, cradling his arm. Gaptooth rushed in from the left. The stranger pivoted, swinging the umbrella low, taking Gaptooth's legs out from under him. The man went down hard, face first, into the cobblestones. The third man, Shadowlurker, pulled a revolver. The stranger moved. Faster than Marlo's eyes could track, he closed the distance, grabbed the gun hand, twisted. There was another crack bone, this time not wood. Shadowlurker dropped the revolver and collapsed to his knees, whimpering. 3 men down in less than 3 seconds. The stranger stood over them, umbrella still in hand, not even breathing hard. "Go," he said, not loud, not angry, just absolute. "Before I lose my temper." They went, scrambling, limping, one of them still crying. They disappeared into the maze of alleys like rats fleeing a sinking ship. Silence fell, broken only by the rain. The stranger turned to Marlo. She was still on her knees in the filth, staring up at him. Water ran down her face, rain or tears, she couldn't tell anymore. He looked down at her for a long moment, taking in the ruined wedding dress, the blood on her lip, the hollow desperation in her eyes. Then he did something Marlo would remember for the rest of her life. He knelt, not crouched, not bent down while standing. He lowered himself to one knee in the sewage and rainwater, bringing himself to her eye level. The expensive coat she could see, now it was well-made military style with brass buttons soaked through immediately. He didn't seem to notice. "Ma'am," he said quietly. The roughness was gone from his voice, replaced by something careful, gentle. "You're injured." Marlo touched her lip. Her fingers came away red. Her voice cracked. She tried again. I didn't." "You're safe now." He unbuttoned his coat with one hand, shrugged out of it. Underneath, he wore a dark suit, simple but well-tailored, a white shirt with no collar. "You're freezing." He draped the heavy coat over her shoulders. It was warm. It smelled of tobacco and rain and something else, gun oil maybe, or saddle leather. Something masculine and utterly foreign to her world of perfumes and parlors. Marlo pulled the coat closer, shivering violently as her body began to remember it was capable of feeling temperature. The stranger stayed kneeling. He didn't touch her, didn't crowd her, just waited, giving her time, giving her space, proving with his stillness that she was the one in control here, despite the fact that she was on her knees in filth and he'd just taken down 3 armed men. "I'm Silas Thorne," he said. "I work security for Duke Gideon Ravencourt. My carriage is just around the corner. I'm not going to hurt you." He paused. "May I help you stand?" He extended his hand. It was a large hand, calloused, scarred across the knuckles. The hand of someone who worked with his body, not just his mind. Marlo looked at that hand. She thought about the hands that were supposed to hold her tonight. Damien's hands, soft, manicured. The hands of a man who'd never done a day of physical labor in his life. Hands that signed checks and held pens and pointed at things for other people to fetch. Hands that had written, "Consider yourself furnishing." She looked back up at Silas Thorne's face, where her voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Where are you taking me?" His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his storm gray eyes, something that might have been approval. "To the only place in New York where Damien Crowe cannot reach you." Marlowe stared at him. "You know who I am. I know who your husband is." A muscle ticked in his jaw when he said the word husband. "And I know what kind of man he is." "How poea?" Later, Silas's hand remained extended, steady as stone. "Right now, you need to get out of this rain. You need to get warm. And you need to decide, do you want to go back to that house or do you want to go forward? Forward. The word hung between them like a promise. Marlowe reached out. She placed her small gloved hand, ruined now, the silk torn and stained, into his large scarred one. His fingers closed around hers, firm, protective, unbreakable. He pulled her to her feet, and for the first time since she'd read that letter, Marlowe felt the ground beneath her was solid. The carriage that waited around the corner was unmarked. Black lacquered wood, no crest on the door, pulled by two dark horses that stood motionless despite the storm. The driver, hunched under an oilskin coat, didn't look at Marlowe as Silas helped her inside. The interior was simple but well-appointed. Leather seats, a wool blanket folded on one bench. Silas climbed in after her, settling on the opposite seat, maintaining that careful distance. He rapped twice on the ceiling. The carriage lurched forward. Marlowe pulled the blanket around herself, layering it over Silas's coat. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, not just from cold anymore. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made her limbs feel like lead. "You said you work for a duke." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, hoarse, older. "I didn't know there were American dukes." "There aren't." Silas was doing something with his hands, wrapping his knuckles with a handkerchief. The skin was split where he'd hit one of the attackers. "It's an affectation. Gideon Ravencourt inherited the title from his English grandfather, but it means nothing here. He keeps it because it annoys the right people." "And what does this Duke Ravencourt want with me?" Silas looked up from his hands. Even in the dim interior of the carriage, his eyes were sharp, assessing. "The Duke doesn't want anything with you, Mrs. Crowe, but he has a particular interest in your husband." Marlowe's stomach clenched. "I'm not Mrs. Crowe. The law would disagree, and the law can go to hell." The profanity felt good on her tongue, forbidden, dangerous. "Damien made it very clear I'm nothing but a decoration. I don't owe him the dignity of his name." Something that might have been a smile flickered across Silas's face. It was gone before Marlowe could be sure she'd seen it. "What name would you prefer, Marlowe?" She lifted her chin. "Just Marlowe. I'm done with titles and pretense and—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her bloody lip between her teeth, tasting copper again. "I'm done with all of it." Silas nodded slowly. "Marlowe, then." The way he said it, simple, matter-of-fact, accepting, made something tight in her chest loosen just a fraction. The carriage rolled through the storm-dark streets. Marlowe tried to track their route, but exhaustion and shock had turned her sense of direction to mush. They were heading east, she thought, maybe south, away from Fifth Avenue, away from the glittering prison of her marriage. "You said you know what kind of man Damien is," Marlowe said after a long silence. "What did you mean?" Silas was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on something beyond the rain-streaked window. "5 years ago," he said finally, "the Duke's son Arthur Ravencourt managed the eastern expansion of the Transcontinental Railroad. $2 million went missing from the construction funds. The money vanished. The project collapsed. Hundreds of workers lost their jobs." Marlowe's hands tightened in the blanket. She had a terrible feeling she knew where this was going. "They arrested Arthur," Silas continued. His voice had gone flat empty. The voice of a man who'd told this story too many times and had learned to strip all emotion from it to survive. "Charged him with embezzlement. They found falsified ledgers in his office, forged documents with his signature. The evidence was overwhelming, but he didn't do it." Silas's eyes snapped to her face. "How do you know?" "Because Damien did." Marlowe was surprised by the certainty in her own voice. "That's his pattern. My father told me once before he died that Damien built his fortune by destroying competitors, buying their debts, framing them for his crimes, taking what they built and stamping his name on it." Your father was right. Silas's jaw was tight. Arthur Ravencourt was sent to Sing Sing prison. He lasted 6 months before he hung himself in his cell. He left a note, 3 words, "I am innocent." The carriage seemed to shrink around them. Marlowe felt the weight of those words like stones on her chest. "And the Duke," she whispered. "Broken. His son was everything to him. After Arthur's death, Gideon had an accident, fell down the stairs of his mansion, or threw himself down. Accounts vary. Either way, he'll never walk again. Marlowe thought of her own father, Baron Cornelius Ashcroft, who'd put a pistol to his temple rather than face bankruptcy and shame. The violence men did to themselves when the world became unbearable. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Silas shook his head. "Don't be sorry. Be angry. Arthur was my friend. More than my friend, he was my commanding officer during the war. The best man I've ever known. And your husband murdered him as surely as if he'd tied the noose himself." Your husband. Marlowe wanted to correct him again, but the words stuck in her throat. Because legally, that's what Damien was. Her husband, till death do them part. "Why didn't the Duke fight back?" she asked. "If he knew Damien was responsible." "He tried, we tried." Silas's hands clenched into fists on his knees. "But Damien Crowe is very, very good at hiding his tracks. The evidence we needed, the real ledgers, the proof of his fraud, it's locked somewhere we can't reach. For 5 years, we've been searching, waiting, looking for any opening, any weakness." He stopped abruptly, his eyes narrowing. Marlowe felt a chill that had nothing to do with her wet clothes. "And then I appeared," she said slowly. "The abandoned bride, the disgraced wife. A weakness." Silas held her gaze. "Yes. At least he was honest. So you did save me because I'm useful." Marlowe tried to keep the bitterness out of her voice and failed. "I saved you because 3 men were about to kill you for a necklace." Silas leaned forward slightly. "Everything else is complicated, but I won't lie to you, Marlowe. The Duke will want your help. And he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want Damien Crowe to pay for what he did to Arthur. If working with you can make that happen, I'll do it. But not at your expense. You have my word on that." Marlowe studied his face, the scar through his eyebrow, the hard lines around his mouth, the eyes that had seen violence and hadn't looked away. This was not a man who lied prettily. He was too blunt for that, too direct. It should have frightened her. Instead, for reasons she didn't quite understand, it made her feel safer. "What kind of help?" she asked. "I don't know yet. The Duke will—" The carriage stopped. Silas glanced out the window, then back to Marlowe. "We're here." Here was a mansion in Gramercy Park. Not as ostentatious as the Crowe residence, but larger. Older. Built from dark stone that seemed to absorb the gaslight rather than reflect it. Gothic architecture, all sharp angles and narrow windows. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The driver opened the door. Rain gusted in, cold and brutal. Silas climbed out first, then extended his hand to help Marlowe down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet touched the ground. Only Silas's grip kept her upright. "Easy," he murmured. "You've been through hell tonight. Let's get you inside." He kept one hand on her elbow as they climbed the steps to the front door. It opened before they reached it. A woman stood in the doorway. 60 perhaps, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a black dress with a white apron, a housekeeper's uniform. But her eyes, sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed spectacles, were anything but servile. "Mr. Thorne." Her gaze moved to Marlowe, taking in the ruined wedding dress, the blood, the desperate exhaustion. Her expression softened. "Oh, you poor child. Come in quickly." The interior of the Ravencourt mansion was warm, blessedly impossibly warm after the cold rain. Dark wood paneling absorbed the lamplight. Thick carpets muffled their footsteps. Somewhere in the house, a fire was crackling. "Mrs. Ainsworth," Silas said to the housekeeper, "this is Marlowe. She'll be staying with us for a while. She needs dry clothes, hot tea, and medical attention for her lip." "And a bath," Mrs. Ainsworth added, looking at Marlowe's mud-caked hem with professional disapproval. "And probably a strong brandy. Come with me, dear." Marlowe looked at Silas. Some part of her, the part that had been alone in that bedroom, reading Damien's letter that had walked through the rain with nowhere to go, was terrified to let him out of her sight. "I'll be here," he said quietly, reading her fear. "The Duke will want to speak with you, but not tonight. Tonight you rest. I promise you're safe here." Marlowe nodded. She didn't quite believe him, but she wanted to. Mrs. Ainsworth led her up a grand staircase down a hallway lined with portraits of stern-looking men and women, and into a bedroom that was larger than her entire childhood nursery had been. "The Duke's late sister's room, Mrs." Ainsworth explained, moving to light the lamps. "Catherine. She passed 5 years ago. Consumption. Poor thing never got to wear half these dresses." She opened a wardrobe to reveal rows of gowns, all slightly out of fashion, all in dark, somber colors. "They'll be a bit large on you. Catherine was taller, but better than that wet shroud you're wearing." Mrs. Ainsworth turned to face Marlowe, her expression kind but firm. Let's get you out of that dress. It took 20 minutes. The wedding gown was so soaked and heavy that it fought them like a living thing. The corset underneath had swelled with water, the laces impossible to loosen. Finally, Mrs. Ainsworth fetched scissors and simply cut through them. Marlowe gasped as the pressure released. She could breathe, actually breathe. Barbaric contraptions, Mrs. Ainsworth muttered, tossing the ruined corset into a corner. I've never understood why we torture ourselves in the name of fashion. She helped Marlowe into a simple linen nightgown, modest, warm, soft against skin that felt raw and oversensitized. Then she sat Marlowe down at the vanity and gently cleaned the cut on her lip with witch hazel. There now, she said, dabbing on some kind of salve that smelled of camphor and mint. It's not deep, won't even scar. Marlowe stared at her reflection. Without the elaborate hairstyle, without the wedding dress, without the trappings of Mrs. Damien Crowe, she looked like herself, whoever that was. Mrs. Ainsworth set a tea tray on the bedside table. Earl Grey with honey and toast. You need to eat something. I'm not hungry. Eat anyway. Trust me, dear. You'll feel better. Marlowe doubted that very much, but she obediently nibbled at the toast. It tasted like sawdust. Mrs. Ainsworth hovered, clearly wanting to ask questions but restraining herself. Finally, she said, Mr. Thorne is a good man, you know. Gruff but good. If he brought you here, you must need sanctuary. Do you know why he might need me? Marlowe asked. Not my place to say. Mrs. Ainsworth smoothed the coverlet on the enormous four-poster bed. But I'll tell you this, the Duke has been a ghost for 5 years. Ever since Arthur died, and Mr. Thorne, well, he blames himself. He was there when they arrested Arthur. He tried to fight them off, and they beat him half to death for it. Marlowe remembered the scars on Silas's knuckles, the way he moved like a man used to violence. Why would he blame himself? Because he survived. Mrs. Ainsworth's voice was soft, and Arthur didn't. It's a terrible burden, survivor's guilt. Makes men do desperate things. Including Marlowe thought rescuing strange women from alleys. Mrs. Ainsworth left her with instructions to ring if she needed anything. Marlowe climbed into the bed impossibly soft after the hard reality of the night and tried to close her eyes. She couldn't. Every time she started to drift, she saw Damien's face, heard his voice reading that letter, furnishing, or she saw the knife descending toward her throat, felt the rain soaking through her dress, or, and this was worst of all, she saw nothing. Just the enormous black emptiness of the future stretching out before her. No husband, no home, no name, no plan. Marlowe sat up, pressing her hands to her face. She wanted to cry. Should cry. Normal women cried when their wedding nights turned into nightmares. When they were attacked by thieves, when they fled into storms and ended up in strange mansions with men who wanted to use them for revenge. But no tears came. There was only the rage. Burning, constant. A coal fire in her chest that wouldn't bank, wouldn't cool. Good, she thought. Let it burn. It's better than grief. A soft knock at the door made her jump. It's Silas, came the voice from the hallway. May I come in? Marlowe pulled the blankets up to her chin. Yes. He entered carrying a glass of amber liquid. He'd changed clothes, no longer wearing the wetsuit now, in simple dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. She could see more scars on his forearms, pale lines against tanned skin. Brandy, he said, offering the glass. Mrs. Ainsworth's orders. She says you need it. Marlowe took it. The first sip burned. The second was better. By the third, she could feel warmth spreading through her chest, loosening some of the tension. Silas pulled over a chair from the corner and sat maintaining that careful distance. You should rest. Tomorrow will be... I don't want to rest. Marlowe heard the edge in her own voice. I want to know everything. What the Duke wants from me. What you think I can do. How we can destroy Damien Crowe. Silas studied her for a long moment. Tonight. Tonight I was abandoned by my husband. Tonight I was nearly killed. Tonight I learned that the man I married is a murderer. Marlowe set the brandy down with a sharp click. I don't need rest, Mr. Thorne. I need purpose. So tell me, what happens now? Something shifted in Silas's expression. The careful neutrality cracked, showing something underneath. Not pity, not sympathy, respect. All right, he said. The Duke will want to meet you tomorrow morning, but I can tell you what we know and what we need. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. Damien Crowe keeps records, meticulous records. He's too paranoid not to. Somewhere, probably in his private study at the Greystone Estate, there's a ledger, a red one. It contains the real accounts from the railroad project, proof that he embezzled the money and framed Arthur. and you need me to steal it. We need someone who can get into the Greystone estate, someone Damien won't suspect. Marlowe laughed. It came out bitter. But I'm the abandoned wife. Why would he let me anywhere near his mistress's residence? He won't. That's why you'll have to break in. The words hung in the air. Marlowe thought about the girl she'd been this morning, the one who'd spent hours in front of the mirror making sure every hair was perfect for the wedding ceremony, the one who'd never broken a rule in her life, who'd married a man she barely knew, because it was her duty, because it would save her family's name. That girl was gone, drowned in the rain, murdered in an alley. The woman sitting here now was something else, something harder, something with nothing left to lose. Teach me, Marlowe said. Silas raised an eyebrow. Teach you what? Everything, how to pick locks, how to move quietly, how to steal what we need. She met his eyes. If I'm going to help you destroy my husband, I'm going to do it properly. I'm done being ornamental. For a moment, Silas didn't respond. Then slowly he stood. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. Tomorrow morning, he said, after you've spoken with the Duke, if you still want to do this, if you understand what you're risking, then yes, I'll teach you. I want to do this. You might change your mind when you understand what Damien Crowe is capable of. Marlowe thought of the letter, the abandonment, the casual cruelty, the way he'd reduced her to property with a few pen strokes. I already know what he's capable of, she said quietly. That's why I want to watch him burn. Silas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Get some sleep, Marlowe. Tomorrow we start planning a heist. He left, closing the door softly behind him. Marlowe sat in the enormous bed in the dead woman's nightgown in the house of a broken duke and felt something she hadn't felt since reading that letter. Hope. It was small, fragile, dangerous. But it was there. She finished the brandy, set the glass aside, and this time when she closed her eyes, she slept. Marlowe woke to sunlight cutting through unfamiliar curtains like a blade. For 3 heartbeats, she didn't remember where she was. The bed was too soft. The ceiling was wrong ornate plasterwork instead of plain white. The smell was different. No orange blossom water, no rose sachets, just beeswax and old wood and something faintly medicinal. Then memory crashed back. The letter, the rain, the alley, Silas Thorne kneeling in the filth. I'm in the Ravencourt mansion. I ran away from my wedding night. I'm going to help steal evidence to destroy Damien Crowe. Marlowe sat up slowly. Her body ached everywhere, muscles she didn't know she had, screaming in protest from last night's flight through the storm. Her lip was swollen where she'd bitten it. When she touched her cheek, she felt the tender ghost of where she'd slapped herself. The room looked different in daylight, still grand, but sad somehow. Dust motes drifted through the sunbeams. The wardrobe full of Catherine Ravencourt's dresses stood like a mausoleum of fabric, a dead woman's clothes waiting for a body that would never come. A knock at the door made her flinch. Miss Marlowe? Mrs. Ainsworth's voice brisk and businesslike. I've brought breakfast. May I enter? Yes. The housekeeper swept in, carrying a tray laden with covered dishes. She set it on the writing desk, then turned to assess Marlowe with a professional eye. You have more color this morning. Good. I was worried you'd catch pneumonia from that soaking. She whisked the covers off the dishes. Eggs, toast, bacon, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Eat it all. Marlowe's stomach rebelled at the sight of food, but she forced herself to the desk and picked up the fork. The first bite of egg was difficult, the second easier. By the third, she realized she was ravenous. Mrs. Ainsworth nodded with satisfaction. The Duke will see you at 10 o'clock in the library. I've laid out a dress. She gestured to the bed where a dark green day dress waited. It was Catherine's favorite. She had good taste at least. Mrs. Ainsworth, Marlowe said carefully. What should I expect from the Duke, I mean? The housekeeper's expression softened. Gideon Ravencourt is not an easy man, Miss Marlowe. The accident left him bitter. Arthur's death nearly destroyed him. But underneath all that anger, she paused. He's fair, and he loved his son more than anything in this world. If you're truly willing to help bring down the man who murdered Arthur, the Duke will move heaven and earth to protect you. And if I'm not willing, then he'll have Silas drive you wherever you want to go with enough money to start fresh somewhere far from New York. The Duke doesn't force people into his wars. Mrs. Ainsworth's voice dropped. But I'll tell you something, dear. I've worked in this house for 30 years. I watched Arthur grow up. He was the finest young man I ever knew. Fond, honorable, everything his father taught him to be. And Damien Crowe killed him for money. Her eyes hardened behind her spectacles. So if you can hurt that monster, if you can make him pay even a fraction of what he deserves, then I'll help you however I can. Marlowe felt the weight of those words. This wasn't just the Duke's vendetta. It was a house in mourning, everyone inside it carrying the same wound. She finished breakfast in silence. Mrs. Ainsworth helped her into Catherine's green dress. It fit surprisingly well, only needing a quick tuck at the waist. She pinned Marlowe's hair in a simple style, nothing like the elaborate construction from yesterday's wedding. At precisely 10 o'clock, Silas appeared at the door. He looked different in daylight. Still dangerous, but the exhaustion from last night had faded. He'd shaved, revealing a strong jaw with a small scar at the corner of his mouth. He wore a dark gray suit that did nothing to soften his military bearing. "Ready?" he asked. Marlowe nodded, not trusting her voice. They walked through the mansion's corridors in silence. Marlowe tried to memorize the route down the main staircase through a hall lined with oil paintings of grim ancestors past a music room where a pianoforte sat gathering dust. The library was at the back of the house. Double doors of carved oak. Silas knocked once, then pushed them open. The room beyond was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on 3 walls packed with leather-bound volumes. A massive fireplace dominated the 4th wall, flames crackling despite the relatively mild October morning. Persian rugs covered dark hardwood floors. The air smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. And in the center of it all, facing the fire, sat Duke Gideon Ravencourt in his wheelchair. He didn't turn when they entered, just sat there silhouetted against the flames, utterly still. "Close the door, Silas," he said. His voice was a rasp like sandpaper on stone. Silas obeyed, then positioned himself near the door. Standing guard or standing witness, Marlowe couldn't tell. "Come closer, girl," the Duke commanded. "Don't bite much." Marlowe forced herself to walk forward. She stopped 10 feet from the wheelchair, close enough to see him clearly. Gideon Ravencourt had once been a large man. You could see it in his shoulders, still broad despite the wasting of his legs. His hair was white, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with an angry chisel. Deep lines bracketed his mouth. His eyes, pale blue, almost colorless, were the coldest things Marlowe had ever seen, until they focused on her face. Then something flickered there, something that might have been recognition. "You have your mother's eyes," he said abruptly. Marlowe blinked. "You knew my mother. Knew of her. Eleanor Ashcroft, née Winters. She had a season in London before she married your father. Caused quite a scandal by refusing 3 proposals from earls." The Duke's mouth twisted. "She wanted to marry for love. Romantic nonsense. Look where it got her dead at 35, leaving behind a daughter to be sold like chattel." The casual cruelty of it took Marlowe's breath away, but before she could respond, the Duke's expression shifted. "I'm not mocking her, girl. I'm stating facts. Your mother chose love over security, and it destroyed her. You chose duty over desire, and Damien Crowe spat in your face anyway. The world is not kind to women who make choices. Any choices." He wheeled closer, the chair's wheels creaking. "So the question is, what choice will you make now?" Marlowe lifted her chin. "Silas said you need help destroying my husband." "Not your husband. Not anymore if you're smart." The Duke pulled a folded paper from his jacket and tossed it onto the low table between them. "Annulment papers, already drawn up. My lawyers can have them filed by this afternoon. Non-consummation is grounds enough, and since Damien abandoned you on your wedding night, we have witnesses who'll testify he never intended to fulfill his marital duties." Marlowe stared at the papers. Freedom right there, legal freedom. "What's the cost?" she asked quietly. The Duke laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Smart girl. There's always a cost, isn't there? Here's mine. I want Damien Crowe's neck in a noose. I want him exposed, ruined, imprisoned, and ultimately dead. I want him to suffer the way my son suffered. And to do that, I need evidence." He wheeled to a large desk and picked up a leather portfolio. When he opened it, Marlowe saw photographs, documents, newspaper clippings. "This is 5 years of investigation," the Duke said. 5 years of tracking Damien's movements, his business dealings, his crimes. We know he embezzled $2 million from the Transcontinental Railroad. We know he framed Arthur. We know he's bribed judges, blackmailed senators, and destroyed at least 3 other competitors using similar methods. He slapped the portfolio shut. "But knowing and proving are different things. And Damien is very, very careful." "The Red Ledger," Marlowe said, remembering Silas's words from last night. "You think it's at the Greystone estate?" "We know it is. We have a source, one of the servants. She's seen Damien retrieve it from his private study, though she's never been able to get close enough to steal it herself." The Duke's eyes bored into Marlowe's. "The study is on the 2nd floor. The door has a Brahma lock unpickable by conventional means. But Damien gave you a key last night, didn't he? When he threw you away like garbage?" Marlowe's hand went instinctively to the pocket of her discarded wedding dress, now somewhere in this house being cleaned or burned. She'd forgotten about the key, the brass one Damien had included on the silver tray with his cruel letter. It was a key, she said slowly, at the Fifth Avenue house, where he keeps, she trailed off, realizing, where he keeps things he wants accessible, important things. Exactly. The Duke leaned forward in his chair. Damien is paranoid, but he's also arrogant. And arrogance has a tell. He uses the same Brahma lock system across all his properties to avoid carrying multiple keys. One master key for his safe, his study doors, even the vault at Manhattan Trust. Efficiency disguised as control. But I left it behind when I ran. Silas retrieved it. The Duke gestured, and Silas produced a small brass key from his pocket. It gleamed in the firelight, along with a few other items from the house that might prove useful. Your husband's household staff is surprisingly sympathetic to abandoned brides. Marlowe looked at the key, such a small thing, 3 inches of metal, but it represented access, opportunity, power. What exactly are you proposing, she asked. The Duke's smile was sharp as broken glass. Tonight, Damien Crowe is attending the annual dinner at the Manhattan Club. He'll be there from 8 until at least midnight. The bastard loves showing off to his fellow robber barons. The Greystone estate will be lightly staffed, just Lady Seraphina Vane and a skeleton crew of servants. You want me to break into my husband's mistress's house and steal evidence while he's at dinner? Marlowe heard the flatness in her own voice. I want you to take back what was stolen from you, the Duke corrected. Your dignity, your autonomy, your right to walk away from a man who treated you like property. He paused. And yes, in the process, retrieve the evidence that will hang him. Why not just send Silas or your men? Why do you need me? Because if we're caught, we need plausible deniability. You're the scorned wife. You went to your husband's house to retrieve personal items. Who could blame you? It's sympathetic, understandable, even admirable in a tragic sort of way. The Duke's voice hardened. But if Silas is caught breaking into Damien's study, it's burglary. Criminal. We lose everything. Marlowe understood. She was the shield, the excuse, the socially acceptable face of their revenge. And if we succeed, she asked, if we get this ledger, what then? Then we destroy him. The Duke's eyes glittered with something that looked like madness or justice. Perhaps they were the same thing. There's a Senate subcommittee hearing in 3 days. They're investigating financial irregularities in government-funded railroad projects. If we can present the evidence properly publicly with witnesses, Damien won't just lose his political ambitions. He'll lose everything, his fortune, his freedom, his life. You said a noose earlier. They don't hang people for embezzlement. No. The Duke's smile was terrible. But they do hang them for treason. The word fell like a stone into deep water. What are you talking about? Marlowe whispered. Silas spoke for the first time since they'd entered the library. During the war, the Civil War, Damien was a civilian contractor. He supplied the Union Army with rail equipment. But we have reason to believe he also sold information to Confederate forces, railroad routes, troop movements, supply schedules. Arthur discovered it, the Duke continued. That's why Damien had to silence him. Arthur found evidence that Damien wasn't just embezzling, he was actively undermining the war effort, selling out his own country for profit. The old man's hands clenched on the arms of his wheelchair. That's not just a crime, Miss Ashcroft. That's capital treason, and the penalty is death. Marlowe's mind reeled. She'd known Damien was cruel, greedy, ruthless. But a traitor, a man who'd profited from American deaths during the bloodiest conflict in the nation's history. The ledger proves this. If it's the one we think it is, yes. Arthur's notes mentioned a red leather book with coded entries. He'd only just begun deciphering them when Damien had him arrested. The Duke's voice cracked slightly. My son died protecting his country, and the man who killed him walks free, dines with senators, plans to join their ranks. The rage in those words was so pure, so absolute that Marlowe felt it like a physical force. She looked at Silas. He stood perfectly still, but his jaw was clenched tight enough that she could see the muscle jumping. These men had lived with this pain for 5 years. 5 years of knowing the truth and being unable to prove it. 5 years of watching Damien prosper while Arthur rotted in an unmarked grave. If I do this, Marlowe said slowly, if I help you steal this ledger, what happens to me afterward, Damien will know. He'll come after me. Let him try. The Duke's voice was steel. You'll have the full protection of this house. More than that, you'll have evidence of his crimes. That makes you valuable, untouchable. He can't kill you without proving his guilt. He paused. And I'll give you $20,000. Enough to disappear, start over anywhere in the world if that's what you choose. $20,000, a fortune. Enough to buy a house, invest in business, live independently for years without ever needing to marry again. Freedom, real freedom. But there was something else. Something the Duke wasn't saying. You think he'll try to have me committed, Marlowe said, to an asylum. That's why you're offering protection. The Duke's expression confirmed it. Damien's already started the process. We have sources who say he met with Dr. Cornelius Wainwright from Bloomingdale Asylum this morning. Wainwright is corrupt, easily bought. For the right price, he'll declare any woman insane. The floor seemed to tilt beneath Marlowe's feet. She'd heard stories about the asylums. Women locked away for years, decades, because they were inconvenient, because they knew too much, because their husbands wanted younger wives or access to their inheritances. Once inside, they never got out. Under the law, Silas said quietly, a husband can commit his wife with just 2 doctors' signatures. He doesn't need proof, just money and the right connections. Which Damien has in abundance, the Duke finished. So you see, Miss Ashcroft, you're not safe anywhere. Not in New York, not in America, possibly not anywhere. Unless we strike first. Unless we take him down so completely that he has no power left to hurt you. Marlowe walked to the window. Outside Gramercy Park was a rectangle of civilized green in the midst of the city. Nurses pushed prams, gentlemen strolled, the wealthy and secure going about their orderly lives. She'd been one of them yesterday morning, or thought she had been. Now she stood on the other side of an invisible line, the side where women ran into storms, where they plotted theft and revenge, where they had to fight or be buried alive in institutions designed to silence them. Teach me, she said, turning back to face them. Whatever I need to know to do this properly. I won't be dead weight. I won't be rescued. I'll be an asset. The Duke studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Silas, she's yours for the day. Teach her everything. Tonight at 7, we move. Silas pushed off from the wall. Yes, sir. And Miss Ashcroft. The Duke's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you. Arthur would have liked you. You have spine. It was Marlowe suspected the highest compliment Gideon Ravencourt knew how to give. Silas led Marlowe to the basement. She'd expected something dank and dungeon-like, but the space beneath the Ravencourt mansion was surprisingly well appointed. Gas lamps provided steady light. The walls were lined with shelves holding everything from wine bottles to toolboxes. And in the center of the main room stood a curious collection of objects, door frames with different types of locks, safes of varying sizes, windows, with various latching mechanisms. The Duke's training room, Silas explained, lighting additional lamps. After Arthur's arrest, Gideon became obsessed with understanding how Damien operated. He had this space built to practice breaking and entering. Ironic, given his station. Or desperate, Marlowe said softly. Silas glanced at her. Yes, that too. He walked to a workbench and began laying out tools. Lockpicks of various sizes, a small hammer, a glass cutter, a coil of rope. Items that looked innocent individually but together suggested crime. We have approximately 8 hours before we need to leave, Silas said. That's not enough time to make you an expert, but I can teach you enough to be useful and, more importantly, to keep yourself safe if things go wrong. When you say go wrong, I mean if we're caught. If Damien comes home early, if Seraphina Vane is more alert than we expect, if the servants raise an alarm. Silas's expression was serious. This is dangerous, Marlowe. I won't pretend otherwise. But you have advantages. You're Damien's legal wife, which gives you a certain amount of protection. And you're a woman, which means people will underestimate you. He picked up a simple pin tumbler lock attached to a door frame. Lesson 1, basic lock picking. This is the most common type of lock you'll encounter. It works by pins of varying lengths that must be pushed to the shear line using tension and manipulation. Marlowe interrupted. You apply rotational tension with one pick while using another to set each pin individually. Silas stared at her. How do you know that? My father taught me. He said a lady should never be trapped anywhere she doesn't want to be. Marlowe took the picks from Silas's hand and knelt by the lock. Her fingers remembered the movements. Insert the tension wrench, apply gentle pressure, feel for the binding pin lift until it clicks. 15 seconds later, the lock opened with a satisfying snick. Silas was very quiet. Marlowe stood brushing dust from Catherine's green dress. What else do you need to teach me? A slow smile spread across Silas's face. It transformed him, making him look younger, less haunted. Your father was an interesting man. He was a gambler and a fool who got us into debt. But he had his moments of clarity. Marlowe felt the familiar ache of grief, but it was distant now. Manageable. What's lesson 2? For the next 3 hours, Silas put her through her paces. He showed her how to move silently, wait on the balls of her feet, testing each floorboard before committing, how to listen for occupants in a room before opening the door, how to disguise her purpose if confronted by servants, how to memorize room layouts at a glance. You have good instincts, he said as she successfully navigated a course through the basement without making a sound, even in Catherine's impractical shoes. Natural talent for this. I spent 20 years learning to move through my parents' house without attracting attention, Marlowe said. Different application, same skill. They practiced opening different types of safes. Combination locks required patient listening, feeling for the subtle clicks as the tumblers aligned. Marlowe's hands were smaller than Silas's, which he said would be an advantage in tight spaces. Around noon, Mrs. Ainsworth appeared with sandwiches and coffee. You're doing well, Miss Marlowe, she said approvingly. I've been watching from the stairs. You move like a cat. After lunch, Silas showed her the weapons. I don't expect we'll need these, he said, opening a locked cabinet to reveal an array of knives, small pistols, and stranger implements Marlowe couldn't identify. But if Damien does come home early, if things escalate, you need to know how to protect yourself. He handed her a small knife, 4-inch blade horn handle, wickedly sharp. This can be hidden in a pocket or garter. If someone grabs you, he demonstrated in slow motion, showing her the vulnerable points on a human body. Throat, inside of thigh, kidneys. You don't slash, you thrust, hard, then you run. Marlowe held the knife, feeling its weight. Such a small thing. But in the right hands at the right moment, it could mean the difference between escape and captivity. Have you ever used one of these? She asked. On a person, I mean. Silas was quiet for a moment. Yes. During the war, during and after. He took the knife back, returned it to the cabinet. The world is violent, Marlowe, especially to women. Knowing how to respond to that violence doesn't make you less of a lady. It makes you a survivor. At 3 o'clock, they took a break. Silas led her to a small sitting room on the first floor where afternoon light spilled through tall windows. You should rest, he said. Tonight will be physically demanding. But Marlowe was too restless to sit. She paced to the window, looking out at the manicured garden behind the mansion. Tell me about Arthur, she said abruptly. Silas went very still. Why? His voice was carefully neutral. Because I'm risking my life to avenge a man I never met. I should know who he was. For a long moment, Silas didn't respond. Then he walked to a sideboard and poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a crystal decanter. He handed one to Marlowe and kept the other. Arthur Ravencourt was my commanding officer during the war. I was 17 when I enlisted, too young, but I lied about my age. He was 22. Old enough to lead, young enough to still give a damn about the men under his command. Silas took a drink and his eyes distant. Most officers treated their soldiers like ammunition. Expendable. Arthur wasn't like that. He learned our names, made sure we had rations, wrote letters to our families when we died. You cared about him. I loved him. Not, Silas cut himself off, then continued more carefully. Not romantically, but he was the best man I knew. The kind of person who makes you want to be better. After the war, when he asked me to work for his father's railroad company, I said yes without hesitation. Marlowe sipped her whiskey, letting him talk. Arthur found the discrepancies by accident. He was auditing the books, looking for ways to improve efficiency. He found transfers that didn't make sense, money disappearing into shell companies. And then, Silas's hand tightened on his glass. Then he found the correspondence. Coded letters between Damien and Confederate sympathizers, proof that Damien had been selling information during the war. He confronted Damien. He went to the Duke first. They were planning to take it to the authorities. But before they could, the federal marshals showed up with arrest warrants for Arthur. Someone had tipped them off to told them Arthur was the embezzler, provided falsified evidence. By the time we understood what was happening, Arthur was already in chains. The pain in Silas's voice was raw and healed. I tried to stop them, he continued. Fought 3 marshals. They beat me unconscious. When I woke up, Arthur was gone. The Duke forbade me from doing anything rash, said we'd fight it legally, prove Arthur's innocence in court. His laugh was bitter. But the trial was a sham. Damien's lawyers had paid off the judge. Witnesses disappeared. Evidence went missing. Arthur was convicted in 3 days. And you've spent 5 years trying to make it right. Trying and failing. Silas drained his whiskey. Until you walked into that alley last night, we had nothing. No way to access Damien's records. No leverage. You're the first real chance we've had to—" He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd said too much. Marlowe understood what he wasn't saying. She was useful. A tool. A means to an end. It should have bothered her more than it did. "I'm glad I can help," she said simply. "Arthur deserved better. So did you." Silas looked at her, then really looked, and something passed between them. Not attraction, not exactly, but recognition. Two people who'd been broken by Damien Crowe in different ways, finding common ground in their shared need for justice. "We should prepare," he said finally. "The carriage leaves at 7 sharp." The Greystone estate sat on the edge of Manhattan near the East River. It was smaller than the Fifth Avenue mansion, only 20 rooms instead of 40, but no less opulent. Built from gray limestone that gave it its name, surrounded by iron fencing and carefully tended gardens. The carriage stopped 2 blocks away. "We walk from here," Silas said, helping Marlowe down. She wore one of Catherine's darker dresses, deep burgundy, that would blend into shadows. Her hair was pinned up severely, and she'd foregone all jewelry. In her pocket, the brass key and the small knife. The sun had set an hour ago, full dark now with clouds covering the moon. Good for concealment, bad for seeing. They approached the estate from the rear, where a service gate led into the kitchen gardens. Silas had the gate open in seconds, just a simple latch, no lock. Inside, the garden was overgrown. Roses gone wild, hedges untrimmed. Clearly, Serafina Vane didn't share Damien's obsession with appearances. Lights showed in several ground-floor windows. The kitchen, probably, and the servants' quarters. But the second floor, where Damien's study was located, was dark. "The servants said the study is at the north end," Silas whispered. "Second door on the right from the main staircase." "Are you ready?" Marlowe nodded, not trusting her voice. They crossed the garden, keeping to the shadows. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Marlowe's heart hammered so hard, she was certain Silas could hear it. The rear entrance to the house was through the conservatory, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants. Silas tried the door, locked. He pulled out his picks, but Marlowe stopped him. She tried the brass key, wondering if Damien's paranoia extended to using the same lock across properties. Click. The door opened. Silas smiled in the darkness. "Your husband is predictable." They slipped inside. The conservatory smelled of earth and orchids. Through the inner door, they could hear voices, servants in the kitchen discussing tomorrow's meals. Silas led the way through a butler's pantry into a back hallway toward the main staircase. They moved in silence, Marlowe remembering everything he'd taught her. Test each step. Listen before moving. Breathe slowly. The staircase was carpeted, blessedly quiet. They climbed to the second floor. The hallway was dark, 4 doors, 2 on each side, second on the right. Silas reached for the handle. "Wait," Marlowe breathed. Light showed under the door. Someone was inside. They froze, pressed against the wall. Footsteps. A woman humming. The door opened. Serafina Vane emerged carrying a candle. She was younger than Marlowe had expected, perhaps 30, beautiful in a hard, practiced way. She wore a silk dressing gown and smelled of French perfume. She walked right past them without looking, heading toward what was probably her bedroom at the end of the hall. Marlowe didn't breathe until Serafina's door closed. Silas mouthed, "We have to be faster now." They slipped into the study. It was a masculine space. Dark wood, leather chairs, a massive desk covered in papers, bookshelves, and against the far wall a painting, a fox hunt scene, ornate frame. "The safe's behind that," Silas said, already moving. Marlowe followed. Together they lifted the painting off the wall. Behind it was a wall safe, substantial and imposing. Marlowe tried the brass key. It fit. It turned. The safe door swung open. Inside, stacks of cash, bond certificates, and there, wrapped in oilcloth, a red leather ledger. Silas pulled it out with hands that shook slightly. He opened it to a random page. Even in the dim light, Marlowe could see the entries. Dates, numbers, coded names. And in the margins, notes in what must have been Arthur's handwriting: CSA contact, troop movements sold, verify payment schedule. This was it, the evidence they needed. "Let's go," Silas said, already wrapping the ledger back up. That's when they heard the front door slam. Voices in the foyer below. Male voices. Ridiculous leaving the club early, but Whitmore insisted. Damien Crowe's voice. He was home. Silas and Marlowe stared at each other in horror. "The window?" Silas mouthed. They ran to the study window. It overlooked the side garden, a 20-foot drop onto flagstone. "Too far," Marlowe whispered. Footsteps on the stairs. Coming closer. "Need to retrieve some documents for tomorrow's meeting." Damien's voice right outside the study door. No time to run, no time to hide. Silas grabbed Marlowe and pulled her behind the heavy velvet curtains that flanked the window. They pressed into the alcove, barely breathing. The study door opened. Gaslight flooded the room. Damien entered, and with him another man Marlowe didn't recognize. They were discussing railroad bonds, percentages, political favors. Through the gap in the curtains, Marlowe could see Damien clearly for the first time since the wedding. He looked satisfied, smug, the picture of a successful man enjoying the fruits of his crimes. He walked to the desk, rifling through papers. "I'm telling you, Whitmore, the Senate seat is as good as mine. The committee hearing is a formality. I have 3 senators in my pocket." "And your wife?" Whitmore asked. "Any word?" Damien laughed. It was a cruel sound. "The stupid girl wandered off in the rain. They'll find her body in the river eventually, or she'll surface at some charity house too ashamed to show her face. Either way, she's no longer my problem." Behind the curtain, Marlowe felt Silas's arm around her waist, keeping her upright, keeping her silent. "Wainwright from Bloomingdale is on standby," Damien continued. "If she does surface, I'll have her committed. 1 signature from him, 1 from the family physician, and she disappears into the asylum. Problem solved." "You're a cold bastard, Crow." "I'm practical. That's why I'll be senator, and you'll still be chasing ambulances." Damien moved toward the safe. Marlowe's heart stopped. He'd see it was open. He'd know someone had been here. But then Whitmore spoke from the doorway. "We should go. Your carriage is waiting, and I have an early meeting." Damien hesitated, then waved dismissively. "Fine, the documents can wait until morning." They left. The door closed. Marlowe and Silas waited in the alcove for a full minute, neither moving, barely breathing. Finally, Silas peered through the curtain. "They're gone." They emerged from hiding. Marlowe's legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk. "Out," Silas said. "Now, before he comes back." They made it down the stairs, through the conservatory, into the garden, over the wall, into the street. The carriage was waiting where they'd left it. Only when they were inside, door closed, horses moving, did Marlowe allow herself to react. Her hands were trembling. Her breath came in short gasps. The full weight of what Damien had said crashed over her. They'll find her body in the river. He'd expected her to die, wanted her to die. And if she survived, he'd have her locked away in an asylum for the rest of her life. "Breathe," Silas said, gripping her shoulder. "Marlowe, breathe." She tried, failed, tried again. "He wants to kill me," she gasped, "or bury me alive. I'm not a person to him. I'm a problem, a thing to be disposed of." "Hey." Silas moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "Look at me." She did. His gray eyes were steady, fierce. "You're not a problem. You're not a thing. You're a woman who just broke into her husband's house and stole the evidence that's going to destroy him." He squeezed her hands. "You're a goddamn warrior, Marlowe Ashcroft, and he's going to regret every word he just said." The sincerity in his voice cut through her panic. She looked down at their joined hands. His were warm, solid, real. "We have the ledger," she said, trying to focus on the victory. "We have the ledger," Silas confirmed. "Tomorrow we take it to the Duke. And 3 days from now we watch Damien Crow hang." Marlowe nodded slowly. The shaking was subsiding, replaced by something harder, colder. Damien had tried to reduce her to nothing, to property, to a problem, to a body in the river. But she was still here, still breathing, still fighting, and now she had the weapon to cut him down. The carriage rolled through the dark streets of Manhattan, carrying 2 thieves and 1 red ledger, toward a reckoning that had been 5 years in the making. The Ravencourt mansion felt different when they returned, darker, as if the house itself knew what they carried. Duke Gideon was waiting in the library, still in his wheelchair by the fire despite the late hour. Mrs. Ainsworth stood nearby with a tea service, but no one was drinking. Silas laid the red ledger on the desk like an offering at an altar. The Duke stared at it for a long moment without speaking. His pale blue eyes were wet, the first emotion Marlowe had seen him display beyond anger. "Open it," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Silas unwrapped the oilcloth. The leather cover was worn, the edges frayed from handling. He opened to the first page. Arthur Ravencourt's handwriting filled the margins. Notes, observations, questions he'd never gotten to answer. The Duke reached out with a trembling hand and touched his dead son's words. "He knew," Gideon said. "He knew, and he tried to stop it, and they killed him for it." His hand became a fist, crumpling the page. 5 years. 5 goddamn years we've waited." "Not anymore," Silas said quietly. "The Senate hearing is in 3 days. We present this Arthur's notes, the coded entries proving Damien sold intelligence to the Confederates. It won't be enough." The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. A woman stood there, tall, slender, with golden hair piled high and eyes like green glass. She wore a traveling cloak over an emerald dress and despite the late hour looked composed. Elegant, beautiful in the way venomous things are beautiful. Lady Serafina Vane, the Duke said coldly, how did you get into my house? Your cook is sympathetic to women in difficult positions. Serafina stepped into the library pulling off her gloves. We had a conversation about employers who treat people like property. She was quite understanding. Marlowe's hand moved instinctively to the knife in her pocket. Serafina noticed. Her smile was sharp. I'm not here to fight Mrs. Crow, quite the opposite. She looked at the Duke. I'm here to help you destroy the man who murdered my husband. Silence fell like a hammer. Silas recovered first. Your husband died of a heart attack. That's what the inquest said. The inquest lied. Serafina walked to the sideboard and poured herself a brandy with steady hands. My husband, Judge Nathaniel Vane, was investigating railroad fraud. He subpoenaed financial records from the Transcontinental Railroad. 3 days later, he was dead. The doctor said natural causes. I knew better. She drank, then turned to face them. Damien Crow poisoned him. Arsenic in his evening brandy, slow enough to mimic heart disease. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. And when Damien approached me 6 months later with an offer to become his mistress or be arrested as an accessory to my husband's fraud, I understood the choice wasn't really a choice at all. Marlowe studied the woman she thought was her rival. Serafina's hands were white-knuckled on the brandy glass. Her composure was a mask, and beneath it, Marlowe saw the same trapped desperation she'd felt reading Damien's letter. You've been his prisoner, Marlowe said softly, for 5 years. The same amount of time you've been hunting him. Serafina looked at the Duke. I've watched him, listened, gathered information. I know where the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively, and I want out. But more than that, her voice hardened to diamond. I want him to pay. The Duke wheeled closer, studying Serafina with cold calculation. Why should I trust you? You've been in Damien's bed for 5 years, under threat of imprisonment or death, which, if you'll recall, is the same position your Miss Ashcroft was in yesterday. Serafina's eyes flicked to Marlowe. I heard about the wedding night, the letter. I was in my room when he wrote it. The walls at Greystone are thin. I heard him laughing about how he'd bought himself a decoration. I could have come down to warn you, but I was terrified, paralyzed. Marlowe's stomach twisted, but she understood. Fear made cowards of them all. I watched him throw away a 20-year-old girl like garbage, Serafina continued, and I realized he'll do it to everyone eventually. Use them, discard them, destroy them. I'm next. I know too much. So either I run and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, or I help you put him in the ground. What can you offer? Silas asked. Beyond testimony. Serafina set down her glass and reached into her reticule. She pulled out a small vial filled with white powder. Arsenic. From the batch Damien used to kill Nathaniel. I kept a sample. Had it tested by a chemist I trust. It matches the traces found in my husband's body during the autopsy, though the coroner was paid to overlook that detail. She set the vial on the desk next to the ledger. I can also testify about the night Arthur Ravencourt died. Damien celebrated, got drunk, told me everything how he'd framed Arthur, bribed the judge, made sure the evidence was airtight. He thought it was funny, a game. The Duke's face had gone very pale. You knew my son was innocent, and you said nothing. I had no proof, no allies, no power. Serafina's voice cracked. I was alone, Your Grace, and I was terrified. But I'm not alone anymore, am I? She looked around the library at the Duke, at Silas, at Marlowe, at Mrs. Ainsworth standing silent witness. We're all Damien's victims, Serafina said. Different methods, same monster. So let's stop fighting each other and finish him. Marlowe found herself speaking before she'd decided to. I believe her. Everyone looked at her. She could have told Damien we were at the Greystone tonight, Marlowe continued. The walls are thin, she said so herself. She must have heard us in the study. She knows we have the ledger, but she's here instead offering help. She met Serafina's eyes. Women who've been crushed under the same boot recognize each other. Something passed between them, not friendship, not yet, but understanding. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then, if you're lying, Lady Vane, I'll see you hang beside Damien. If I'm lying, I'll tie the noose myself. Then we have an accord. The Duke gestured to Silas. Show her the ledger. Let's see if she can add anything useful. For the next 2 hours they worked. Serafina identified coded names in the ledger, Confederate contacts, Union officers. Damien had bribed politicians in his pocket. She added details about dates and meetings. She explained Damien's system of shell companies and falsified invoices. Mrs. Ainsworth brought coffee and sandwiches no one touched. Marlowe watched Serafina work, seeing the sharp intelligence beneath the decorative exterior. This woman had survived 5 years as Damien's mistress by being observant, careful, strategic. She'd turned herself into a weapon while pretending to be a toy. Marlowe understood that better than she would have yesterday. Around 3 in the morning, Silas leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. This is enough, more than enough. The Senate committee will have no choice but to investigate. And once they start pulling threads, the whole tapestry unravels, the Duke finished. We need to present this correctly, formally, with witnesses who can't be dismissed. I know someone, Serafina said. Senator James Douglas. He's been trying to investigate railroad corruption for years, but he's always been blocked by Damien's allies. If we bring him this evidence privately, let him present it to the committee as his own discovery. He gets the glory and we get Damien's head, Silas said. I like it. Douglas is incorruptible, the Duke added. One of the few. If he's convinced he won't stop until justice is served, then we approach him today, I mean. Marlowe looked at the clock, past 3. The world outside was still dark. Give him the ledger, the arsenic, our testimonies. He'll want to verify everything, Serafina warned. Run his own investigation. That takes time. How much time? Marlowe asked. Days, maybe a week. We don't have a week. Silas's voice was grim. Damien met with Dr. Wainwright from Bloomingdale Asylum yesterday. He's planning to have Marlowe committed. Once those papers are signed, I'll be locked away where I can't testify. Marlowe felt ice in her veins. He's moving fast because he knows I'm a threat. Then we move faster. The Duke's hands clenched on his wheelchair arms. We force his hand, make him react instead of act. How? Serafina asked. Marlowe found herself standing, pacing to the window. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was seeping into the sky. October 16th, 2 days since her wedding. 2 days since she'd been a different person. We expose him publicly, she said, turning back to the room. Not in a courtroom, not through official channels. Somewhere he can't control, with witnesses who matter. The Academy of Music, Silas said slowly, understanding dawning. There's a gala tomorrow night, October 16th, the annual fundraiser for the Orphans Home Society. Everyone will be there, politicians, businessmen, the press. Damien will be there, Serafina confirmed. He's a major donor. Uses it to polish his reputation. Perfect. Marlowe's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. We don't wait for official channels. We present the evidence there, in front of everyone, force Damien to answer publicly. That's insane, the Duke said, but he was smiling. Also brilliant. It's dangerous, Silas countered. If Damien realizes what's happening, he could, kill me in front of 500 witnesses. Marlowe's voice was harder than she'd known it could be. He wants me silent, dead or locked away. But if I'm standing on a stage with proof of his crimes, with senators and newspapermen watching, he can't touch me, not without proving everything we're saying is true. Serafina was nodding. It could work. The shock value alone would be devastating. And if Senator Douglas is there to lend credibility, I'll contact him first thing this morning, the Duke said. Arrange a private meeting, show him enough to get him on our side, and I'll prepare the presentation, Silas added. Organize the evidence, make it airtight. What about me? Marlowe asked. Everyone looked at her. You, the Duke said, need to prepare to stand in front of New York society and accuse one of the most powerful men in America of treason and murder. Can you do that? Marlowe thought about the letter, the abandoned wedding night, Damien's voice through the study door. They'll find her body in the river. Yes, she said simply. I can do that. Marlowe had tried to sleep but couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damien's face, heard his cruel laugh, felt the weight of what they were about to do pressing down on her chest like a stone. At 8 o'clock, Mrs. Ainsworth brought breakfast to her room. The Duke says Senator Douglas will arrive at 10. You should eat. It'll be a long day. Marlowe forced down toast and coffee. Her stomach was in knots, but Mrs. Ainsworth was right. She needed strength for what was coming. At 9:30, Silas knocked on her door. The Duke wants us all in the library. Douglas will be here soon. They gathered around the massive desk, Marlowe, Silas, Serafina, and the Duke. The red ledger sat in the center like an accusation. Beside it, the vial of arsenic. And next to that, neatly stacked documents, Arthur's notes, bank records, coded correspondence. When Douglas arrives, the Duke said, his voice all business. We let him examine everything. We answer his questions. We make him understand that this isn't revenge, it's justice. And if he doesn't believe us, Serafina asked, he will. The Duke's certainty was absolute. James Douglas lost a nephew at Cold Harbor. If he sees proof that Damien sold intelligence that got Union soldiers killed, he'll move heaven and earth to prosecute. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Ainsworth showed Senator James Douglas into the library. He was a tall man, 65, with a shock of white hair and eyes that missed nothing. He wore a somber black suit and carried himself with the bearing of a man who'd spent 30 years in politics without losing his soul. Gideon, he said, nodding to the Duke. Then his gaze swept the room, landing on each of them in turn. This is quite the assembly. Your message said it was urgent. Urgent doesn't begin to cover it. The Duke gestured to the evidence. Senator, what would you say if I told you I have proof that Damien Crowe committed treason during the war? Douglas's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. I'd say you have my attention. For the next hour, they presented everything. Silas walked Douglas through the ledger, explaining the coded entries, the dates that corresponded with Confederate victories, the payments disguised as legitimate business transactions. Serafina showed him the arsenic, provided the name of the chemist who tested it, explained the timeline of her husband's death. Marlowe told him about the abandoned wedding night, about Damien's plan to have her committed, about overhearing his conversation at the Greystone. The Duke showed him Arthur's notes, pages and pages of careful analysis, questions Arthur had been asking before he was arrested. Douglas listened to all of it in silence. When they finished, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. This is, he paused, choosing his words carefully. This is the most damning evidence of high crimes I've seen in my entire career. If even half of this is true, Damien Crowe deserves to hang. It's all true, the Duke said. I believe you. Douglas looked at each of them. But believing and proving are different things. I'll need to verify the ledger's authenticity, have my own experts examine it, interview witnesses. That takes time. We don't have time, Marlowe said. Damien is moving against me, against all of us. If we wait, he'll find a way to silence us. Which is why we're not waiting, the Duke said. Tonight, the gala at the Academy of Music. You'll be there, Douglas nodded slowly. I'm on the board. I'll be there. Then that's where we expose him, Silas said, publicly, with you as witness. That's highly irregular. But Douglas was smiling. Also exactly the kind of thing that will make it impossible for his bought senators to bury this. If it happens in front of the press, in front of New York society, he stood. I'm in. But we do this right. I'll need to position constables at the Academy, arrange for Damien to be arrested the moment we have him on record denying or confirming the charges. We'll have him on record, Serafina said. Trust me. When Damien is cornered, he'll incriminate himself. His arrogance won't let him stay silent. Douglas picked up the ledger, handling it carefully. I'm taking this with me. I'll have my people verify it today quietly. If it checks out, and I believe it will, I'll bring it to the Academy tonight. He looked at Marlowe. Are you certain you want to do this, Mrs. Crowe? Once you step onto that stage, your life will never be the same. My life already isn't the same, Marlowe said. And I'm not Mrs. Crowe, not for much longer. Good. Douglas tucked the ledger under his arm. Then let's make sure Damien Crowe pays for every life he's destroyed. After Douglas left, the energy in the room shifted. What had been theoretical was now real. Tonight. It was happening tonight. We need to prepare, Silas said. Marlowe, you'll need to practice your speech. It has to be clear, concise, devastating. I'll help, Serafina offered. I know exactly which details will shock society most. Which words will make the press take notice. For the next several hours they worked. Marlowe wrote and rewrote her speech, guided by Serafina's sharp editorial eye and the Duke's sense of dramatic timing. By late afternoon, they had something powerful, something that would cut through the Academy's polite chatter like a knife. At 5 o'clock, Mrs. Ainsworth appeared with garment bags. The Duke had these sent over. You'll need proper evening attire if you're going to war. For Marlowe, a midnight blue silk gown with jet beading, elegant and severe. For Serafina, emerald green that brought out her eyes. Both dresses were armor disguised as fashion. At 6:30, they assembled in the entrance hall. Marlowe in her blue silk, Serafina in green, Silas in formal evening dress, looking uncomfortable but dangerous. The Duke in his wheelchair, wrapped in a heavy cloak. Remember, the Duke said, once we start this, there's no stopping. Damien will fight back. He may try to have you arrested, discredited, even harmed. Stay close to Douglas. Stay close to each other. We will, Marlowe said. Her voice was steady. She felt a strange calm settling over her, the kind that comes when you've made an irrevocable decision. The carriage ride to the Academy was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. Marlowe stared out the window, watching the city pass by. Somewhere in Manhattan, Damien was preparing for the gala, smug and certain. He thought he'd won, thought his abandoned bride was either dead or too broken to matter. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The Academy of Music on 14th Street blazed with light. Carriages lined Irving Place, disgorging women in silk and men in evening dress. The annual gala was the social event of the autumn season, politicians mixing with robber barons, philanthropists rubbing shoulders with opportunists, all of them pretending charity was about more than tax deductions and social climbing. They entered through a side door, avoiding the crowds. Douglas had arranged for them to wait in the wings until the right moment. Marlowe stood behind the heavy velvet curtains, invisible to the crowd settling into their seats. Through a gap, she could see the royal box on the left. And there he was, Damien Crowe. White tie and tails, a red carnation in his buttonhole. Beside him sat 3 senators she didn't recognize, already bought and paid for. He looked pleased with himself, relaxed, the picture of a man who thought he'd won. Marlowe's hands clenched into fists. Not for much longer, she thought. Silas appeared beside her. 5 minutes. Are you ready? Marlowe watched Damien laugh at something one of the senators said. Watched him scan the crowd like a king surveying his kingdom. I'm ready, she said, and she meant it. The evening's scheduled program was simple dinner speeches from various board members, an auction of donated items to benefit the orphanage. Respectable, boring. The kind of event where powerful men checked boxes and felt virtuous. No one expected what was about to happen. The master of ceremonies, a portly man named Whitaker, took the stage to polite applause. He began his introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your generous attendance tonight. We have a wonderful program planned. Serafina Vane appeared from the opposite wing. She walked onto the stage as if she owned it, emerald silk dress shimmering head high. The crowd murmured, a woman interrupting the program irregular. Scandalous. Perfect. Forgive the interruption, Mr. Whitaker. Serafina said, her voice carrying effortlessly through the acoustically perfect hall. But I have an announcement that cannot wait. Whitaker sputtered. Madam, this is highly... My name is Lady Serafina Vane. Some of you know me as the companion of Mr. Damien Crowe. She gestured to the royal box. Damien was sitting forward now, his face darkening. I'm here tonight to tell you the truth about the man you're honoring as a philanthropist. The murmuring grew louder. Damien stood leaning over the box railing. Serafina, you're drunk. Someone remove her from the stage. 2 ushers started forward. Senator Douglas stood from his front row seat. Let her speak. His voice carried the weight of authority. The ushers hesitated. Serafina continued, speaking quickly now. 5 years ago, my husband, Judge Nathaniel Vane, was investigating financial irregularities in government railroad contracts. He discovered that Mr. Crowe had embezzled $2 million from the Transcontinental Railroad project. 3 days after issuing subpoenas for Mr. Crowe's financial records, my husband died. The inquest said heart attack. She pulled a small vial from her reticule, holding it high. This is arsenic, from the same batch used to poison Judge Vane. I can prove Damien Crowe murdered my husband to silence his investigation. The crowd exploded. Shouts, gasps, women feigning or pretending to, men on their feet. Damien's face had gone purple. This is slander. Arrest that woman. On what charge? Senator Douglas called out. Telling the truth. She's mad, a hysteric. I'll have her committed. Like you tried to have your wife committed. Marlowe stepped onto the stage. The crowd's noise doubled. Some recognized her, the missing bride, the abandoned wife. Whispers ran through the hall like wildfire. Marlowe walked to center stage, forcing her legs to move steadily, despite the terror trying to freeze her in place. 800 faces staring. The weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their hunger for scandal. She focused on Damien. Only Damien. My name is Marlowe Ashcroft, she said. Her voice shook on the first word but steadied by the last. 2 nights ago, I married Damien Crowe. He took my father's name, cleared our debts, and promised me a place in society. She pulled a folded paper from her bodice. The letter. The one she'd carried with her like a talisman. This is what he sent me on our wedding night. Instead of joining me in the marital bed, he sent this letter explaining that I was merely property, that he'd acquired me for my name and lineage, that his real affections belonged to Lady Vane. She read the letter aloud, every cruel word, every dismissal, every reduction of her humanity to a transaction. The crowd was silent now, horrified. Even the most jaded socialites looked uncomfortable. I left that night, Marlowe continued. I walked into a storm because staying would have meant accepting that I was nothing, that I'd been bought and discarded. She looked directly at Damien. But I'm not nothing, Mr. Crowe. I'm a witness. Silas appeared from the wings carrying the red ledger. He set it on a small table Douglas had arranged earlier, opening it to marked pages. This is the financial record, mister. Crow kept of his embezzlement, Marlowe said. It shows how he stole $2 million from the railroad project, how he framed an innocent man, Arthur Ravencourt, for his crimes, how Arthur died in prison for Damien's theft. Lies. Damien was screaming now, climbing out of the royal box, pushing past senators and socialites. All lies. She's insane. I'll have her committed. Dr. Wainwright. Where is Dr. Wainwright? A thin man in the third row stood nervously. I'm here, Mr. Crow. Tell them. Damien pointed at Marlowe with a shaking hand. Tell them she's mad. You examined her. You signed the papers. I signed nothing. Dr. Wainwright's voice was quiet but clear. You asked me to certify Mrs. Crow as insane without examination. I refused. When you offered me money to falsify documents, I reported you to Senator Douglas's office. I will testify to that refusal under oath. Damien stared at the doctor, betrayed. I paid you. You offered to pay me. I declined. Wainwright sat down, his face resolute. The crowd erupted in fresh noise. This was better than theater. This was a man of power being dismantled in real time. Senator Douglas stood again, holding the red ledger. I've reviewed the evidence presented by Lady Vane and Mrs. Crow. I've verified the arsenic with independent chemists. I've had my staff authenticate this ledger. Tomorrow morning, I'm bringing formal charges before the Senate Committee on Railroad Affairs. Charges of embezzlement, fraud, and, he paused for emphasis, treason. The word fell like a guillotine blade. During the Civil War, Douglas continued, his voice ringing through the hall. Mr. Crow sold intelligence to Confederate forces, railroad routes, troop movements, supply schedules. Men died because of information he provided to the enemy. That's not just a crime. That's capital treason. Damien had gone very pale. He looked around wildly, searching for allies. But the senators in his box were edging away. The businessmen he'd dined with were suddenly fascinated by their shoes. Even his lawyers were nowhere to be seen. This is a setup, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. A conspiracy. We're all what Mr. Crow, Marlowe stepped to the edge of the stage. All your victims, all the people you used and destroyed, yes, we are. And we're done being silent. Something in Damien broke then. Marlowe saw it happen the moment when fear became rage, when the cornered animal decided to attack. He reached into his coat. Time seemed to slow. Marlowe saw the small pistol, a derringer small enough to evade the door guards who checked only overcoats. She saw Damien's hand shaking as he raised it. The crowd screamed. People dove for cover. Ushers rushed toward him, but were too far away. Damien aimed the gun at Marlowe. If I go down, he snarled, you come with me, you ungrateful. He fired. The crack of the gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Marlowe closed her eyes, waiting for the impact, the pain, the darkness. It didn't come. She opened her eyes. Silas stood in front of her. His left shoulder was blooming, red blood spreading across his white dress shirt. But he was standing. His right hand held his own revolver, aimed steadily at Damien. Drop it, Silas said. His voice was calm despite the blood. Or I drop you. For a moment, the entire academy held its breath. Then Damien's pistol clattered to the floor. Police constables rushed in from the wings. Douglas had arranged for them to be present, anticipating violence. They tackled Damien, forced him to his knees, clamped iron manacles around his wrists. Damien was screaming threats, accusations, promises of revenge. But his voice was drowned out by the chaos of 800 people trying to process what they just witnessed. Marlowe caught Silas as he swayed. You're hurt. You need a doctor. Just a graze, he said, though his face was gray with pain. Through and through. I've had worse. You jumped in front of a bullet for me. Yes. He said it like it was obvious, like there had been no other choice. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Marlowe understood something that terrified her more than Damien ever had. She cared about this man. This scarred, damaged soldier who'd knelt in the mud for a stranger, who'd taught her to pick locks and fight back, who'd just taken a bullet meant for her heart. Don't you dare die, she whispered fiercely. Silas smiled. It was pained but genuine. Wouldn't dream of it. We haven't finished destroying your husband yet. Ex-husband, Marlowe corrected. As of tonight. Senator Douglas climbed onto the stage, followed by several reporters who'd materialized from the crowd like vultures scenting blood. Mrs. Crow, Douglas said, will you testify formally before the Senate committee? I will, about everything. Lady Vane. With pleasure, Senator. Serafina had moved to Marlowe's side. The two women stood together, no longer rivals, allies forged in shared survival. Then as of this moment, Damian Crowe is under arrest, pending investigation for treason, murder, fraud, and attempted murder. Douglas looked at the constables holding Damian. Take him to the tombs. Maximum security, no visitors, no bail. As they dragged Damian toward the exit, he caught Marlowe's eye one last time. The hatred there was pure, absolute. But beneath it, Marlowe saw something else: fear. He was afraid of her, of what she'd become, of the fact that the woman he tried to reduce to nothing had stood up and destroyed him instead. Marlowe smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Damian looked away first. The academy erupted in fresh chaos as reporters mobbed the stage shouting questions. Douglas's people formed a protective barrier, shepherding Marlowe, Serafina, and the injured Silas toward the stage door. Outside, the Ravencourt carriage waited. Duke Gideon sat inside wrapped in a heavy coat despite the mild evening. When he saw them, saw the blood on Silas's shoulder, the exhaustion on their faces, the grim satisfaction in their eyes, he knew. Is it done? He asked. It's done, Silas confirmed, letting Mrs. Ainsworth help him into the carriage. Damian's arrested. The evidence is with Douglas. The trial will be a formality. The Duke closed his eyes. A single tear tracked down his weathered face. Arthur, he whispered, your name is cleared, my boy. Your name is cleared. They rode back to Gramercy Park in silence. Marlowe watched the city pass by the carriage windows. The same street she'd walked 2 nights ago, broken and desperate. She was different now. Harder, colder in some ways, but free. Actually, truly free. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Senator Douglas presented the evidence, methodically building an airtight case. The red ledger, the arsenic, testimony from Serafina, from Marlowe, from Dr. Wainwright. Depositions from railroad workers, from Union Army veterans, from anyone who'd ever been damaged by Damian's schemes. Damian's lawyers tried every trick attacking the witness's credibility, claiming the evidence was fabricated, arguing that a man of Damian's standing couldn't possibly be a traitor. It didn't work. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern man who'd lost a son at Gettysburg, showed no mercy. Damian Crowe, you are hereby sentenced to death by hanging for the crime of treason against the United States. Sentence to be carried out on November 15th, 1889. May God have mercy on your soul, for this court has none. Damian screamed as they dragged him away. He was still screaming when the prison wagon disappeared into the streets. Marlowe didn't attend the sentencing. She'd given her testimony and then retreated to the Ravencourt mansion, where she'd been staying since the night of the gala. The Duke had insisted, you need protection until this is over. Stay as long as you want. The house is too large for just me anyway. So she stayed. Silas's shoulder healed slowly. The bullet had cracked the bone and infection set in for a few terrifying days. Marlowe nursed him through the fever, sitting by his bedside, changing bandages, forcing him to drink water when he was too delirious to remember his own name. Mrs. Ainsworth watched with knowing eyes but said nothing. When Silas finally surfaced from the fever on the 5th day, his first words were, "Did we win?" "We won," Marlowe confirmed. "Damian's convicted, sentenced to hang." Silas closed his eyes, something like peace settling over his features. "Good. Arthur can rest now." "So can you." He looked at her, then really looked. "You stayed, all through the fever. Why? Because you took a bullet for me. Because you knelt in the mud when I had nothing. Because—" Marlowe stopped, not sure how to finish that sentence. Because somewhere between the alley and the heist and the stage at the academy, Silas Thorne had become important to her. More than just an ally. More than just the man who'd saved her life. "Just rest," she said instead. "We can talk when you're stronger." But 3 days later, when Silas was well enough to walk with a cane, he found Marlowe in the library. She'd claimed it as her own space, spending hours there, reading, thinking, planning what came next. "I'm resigning from the Duke's service," Silas said without preamble. Marlowe looked up from her book, startled. "Why?" "Because my obligation is fulfilled. Arthur's name is cleared. Damian is sentenced. The Duke doesn't need a head of security anymore, not really. He needs—" Silas paused. "He needs to heal, and he can't do that with me around, constant reminder of what we lost." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet." Silas moved to the window, leaning on his cane, looking out at Gramercy Park. "I've spent 5 years focused on revenge. Now that it's done, I'm not sure who I am without it." Marlowe set down her book and joined him at the window. "I understand that," she said quietly. "I was Baron Ashcroft's daughter, then Damian Crowe's wife, then the abandoned bride, the witness, the woman who brought down a traitor." She looked at her reflection in the glass. "Now I'm just Marlowe. I don't know what that means yet." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Silas said, "I'm thinking of going west. California maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere new where nobody knows my history. That sounds lonely. Yes. He turned to face her. It does. The weight of unspoken words hung between them. Marlowe thought about the proper thing to do, the respectable choice. To thank Silas for his service, wish him well and let him leave. To stay in New York, use the Duke's protection and her newfound notoriety to rebuild some kind of life in society. But she was so tired of doing the proper thing. Take me with you, she said. Silas stared. What? Take me with you, west, away from New York and society and everything that happened here. The words came faster now, tumbling out. I have money. The Duke settled 20,000 on me as promised. We could buy land, build something, start over somewhere that doesn't know us as the abandoned bride and the vengeful soldier. Marlowe. I'm not proposing marriage, she said quickly. Not yet. I'm proposing partnership, friendship, a chance to figure out who we are when we're not defined by what Damien did to us. Silas was very quiet. Then, you'd give up everything, the Ravencourt protection, society connections, the chance to rebuild your reputation here. I don't want my old reputation back. That woman was weak, compliant, afraid to be alone. Marlowe met his eyes. I'm not her anymore. I don't want to be her anymore. What do you want? It was the same question he'd asked her that first night in the bedroom when she couldn't sleep. This time, Marlowe had an answer. I want to design buildings. Real buildings, not just sketches in a notebook. I want to see mountains and oceans and places that don't have rules about what women can and can't do. She paused. And I want to do it with someone who sees me as a person, not property. Someone who kneels when I fall instead of walking past. Silas's hand found hers. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cool October air coming through the window. California, he said. I hear San Francisco is rebuilding, needs architects and security consultants. Probably. A smile tugged at his mouth. We'd have to travel together, unmarried, scandalous. I've already been abandoned on my wedding night and accused my husband of treason on a public stage. I think my capacity for scandal is well established. Silas laughed. It was the first time Marlowe had heard him truly laugh, not the bitter sound from before, but something genuine, surprised alive. When do we leave? He asked. After the execution. I want to see it finished. November 15th, 1889. The Tombs prison courtyard. Marlowe stood in the crowd of official witnesses, a small group of reporters, government officials, and select citizens. Silas beside her, still using the cane but healing well. Serafina on her other side, dressed in widow's black. The gallows stood in the center of the courtyard. 13 steps. The traditional number. They brought Damien out at precisely noon. He'd aged in the months since his arrest. Gray had appeared in his hair. His face was haggard, his eyes wild. He saw Marlowe in the crowd and lurched toward her, but the guards held him back. This is your fault, he screamed. You were supposed to be nothing. You were supposed to stay silent. Marlowe said nothing, just watched as they forced him up the steps. The priest offered last rites. Damien spat at him. They placed the noose around his neck. Any last words? The warden asked. Damien looked directly at Marlowe. I should have killed you in that bedroom. Yes, Marlowe said loud enough for him to hear. You should have, but you didn't, and that was your biggest mistake. The trapdoor opened. Damien Crowe dropped. His neck didn't break cleanly. It took almost 3 minutes for him to stop twitching. Marlowe watched the entire thing, didn't look away, didn't flinch. When it was over, when they'd cut him down and the doctor had pronounced him dead, she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just a vast hollow relief. It was finished. Serafina touched her arm. Are you all right? I am. Marlowe surprised herself by meaning it. What will you do now? Go back to my maiden name. Reclaim my husband's estate. Damien had it seized, but Douglas is helping me recover it. Maybe travel. Maybe remarry someday if I find someone who sees me as more than decorative. Serafina smiled. It was a tired smile, but real. What about you, California, fresh start? With him. Serafina glanced at Silas, who stood a respectful distance away, giving them privacy. With him, Marlowe confirmed. Good. You deserve happiness after everything. Serafina kissed her cheek. Thank you for being brave enough to stand on that stage. I couldn't have done it without you. Yes, you could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to. They parted with promises to write, though both knew they probably wouldn't. Their connection was forged in trauma, and sometimes the healthiest thing was to leave that trauma behind. Silas and Marlowe left the prison together. Outside, the November day was gray and cold. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. It's going to rain, Silas observed. I know. They walked toward the carriage. Halfway there, the first drops began to fall. Silas stopped fumbling with his cane, trying to open an umbrella with one hand. Here, Marlowe said, taking the umbrella. She opened it, held it over both of them. We share it, equal. Silas smiled. Equal. They walked through the rain together, neither one sheltering the other, both protected by the same canopy. November 16th, 1889. The Ravencourt Mansion. They said their goodbyes to the Duke in his library, surrounded by the books and maps and memories of better days. Gideon gave Marlowe a thick envelope. Letters of introduction, people I know in San Francisco. They'll help you get started. Thank you, Your Grace, for everything. Thank Arthur, the Duke said gruffly. He'd have liked you, would have approved. He looked at Silas. Take care of each other. We will, sir. Mrs. Ainsworth hugged Marlowe like a mother. Write to me. Let me know you're safe. I promise. They took the train west the next morning, November 17th to 25th, 1889. The journey west. The journey took 8 days. They sat together in the passenger car watching America unfold through the windows. Farmland, prairie, mountains, desert. Each landscape more vast and wild than the last. In Kansas, Silas taught Marlowe to play poker. She won 3 hands out of 5. In Nevada, Marlowe sketched buildings she imagined constructing schools, libraries, homes designed for function and beauty both. In the Sierra Nevada mountains, they hit a snowstorm and had to wait 12 hours in a mountain pass. They sat close for warmth, talking about their plans, their fears, their hopes for whatever came next. I'm going to marry you eventually, Silas said as the storm raged outside. When you're ready, when we've both figured out who we are separately, but I want you to know that's my intention. Marlowe looked at him. And if I'm never ready, then we stay partners, friends, whatever you want to be. What if I want to be your wife, but on my terms, no obedience, no submission, just 2 people choosing each other every day? Then that's what we'll be. Marlowe leaned her head on his shoulder. Ask me again in California, when we've built something, when we're not running from the past, but moving toward a future. Deal. November 25th, 1889, San Francisco. They arrived in San Francisco as the sun was setting over the Pacific. The city sprawled across hills surrounded by water on 3 sides. The air smelled of salt and possibility. Buildings climbed impossible slopes. Cable cars rattled through streets full of people from every nation on earth. It was chaotic, loud, unfinished. It was perfect. Their first night, they stayed in a modest hotel near the waterfront. Separate rooms maintaining propriety even here where no one knew them. But the next morning, Silas found them a small house near Telegraph Hill. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a sitting room with windows overlooking the bay. It's not much, he said, but it's a start. Marlowe walked through the empty rooms, imagining furniture, imagining a life. It's perfect. December 1889 to March 1890. Building a life. Marlowe used the Duke's letters to meet with construction companies. The first 3 turned her away. A woman architect was too radical, too scandalous. The 4th, run by a man named Chen, who'd emigrated from China and understood what it meant to be underestimated, gave her a chance. Design me a schoolhouse, he said. If it's good, I'll build it. If it's great, I'll hire you for more. Marlowe worked for 2 weeks straight. She designed a building that maximized natural light, that had wide hallways for children to run, that cost half what the city usually paid for schools. Chen looked at her drawings and smiled. When can you start? Within 6 months, Marlowe had designed 3 more buildings. Word spread. The strange woman architect who designed beautiful functional spaces. Who understood that buildings should serve people, not egos. Silas opened a security consulting business. He trained guards, advised banks, helped businesses protect themselves from the kind of fraud Damien had perfected. His reputation as the man who brought down Damien Crowe preceded him. Clients trusted him implicitly. They worked. They built. They healed. They also learned who they were when they weren't defined by trauma. Marlowe discovered she liked hiking in the hills above the city. Silas discovered he had a talent for carpentry. He built furniture for their house, each piece more refined than the last. They had dinners with Chen and his family. They attended lectures on architecture and engineering. They went to the theater and laughed at comedies. They became friends, real friends, not just allies in a war. And slowly, carefully, they became something more. April 12th, 1892. The cliffs above the Pacific. 3 years after leaving New York on a rainy evening in April, Silas asked the question again. They stood on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific, watching storms roll in from the ocean. Marlowe wore a simple dress she'd designed herself, practical, comfortable, with pockets for her drafting pencils and a sketchbook. Silas knelt on the wet ground. Marlowe Ashcroft, I'm not a duke. I'm not rich. I'm a scarred soldier with a bad shoulder and nightmares. But I love you. I see you not as property, not as decoration, but as the brilliant, fierce, impossible woman you are. He pulled out a simple gold band. Will you marry me as equals, as partners, as two people who choose each other? Marlowe looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who'd saved her in an alley, who'd taught her to pick locks and fight back, who'd taken a bullet for her, who'd left everything behind to build a new life beside her. She knelt too, eye to eye with him the way it should be. Yes, she said, on one condition. Anything. You never kneel for me again. We stand together. Always. Silas smiled. Deal. He slipped the ring on her finger. She pulled him to his feet. They kissed in the rain, the Pacific roaring below them, the storm washing away the last ghosts of who they'd been. And when the rain finally stopped, they walked home together, hand in hand, equal free, two people who'd survived the worst and chosen to build something better. June 1892, the wedding. They married in a judge's office in San Francisco. Small ceremony, Chen and his family as witnesses. No elaborate gowns, no society, no pretense. Just two people making a promise. Silas's vow, I vow to hold the umbrella and to let you hold it for me when I need it. Marlowe's vow, I vow to burn down any cage, yours or mine. They walked out of the courthouse into brilliant California sunshine, married equal free. 1900, 8 years later. Marlowe Ashcroft Cross was known across California as one of the finest architects west of the Mississippi. She designed 40 buildings, schools, libraries, hospitals, homes. She employed a staff of 3 of them, women she'd trained herself. Silas Cross ran the most respected security firm in San Francisco. He'd prevented 2 bank robberies, caught 3 embezzlers, and trained a generation of guards who understood that protecting people meant more than just carrying guns. They had 2 children, Catherine named for the woman whose dresses had clothed Marlowe in her darkest hour, and Arthur named for the man whose death had brought them together. They taught their children that furniture was meant to be sat on, not to describe people. That marriage was a choice you made every day. That rain could destroy or nourish depending on what you built to catch it. 1920, the vote. Marlowe stood in line at the polling station waiting to cast her first legal vote. She was 51 years old. Gray streaked her auburn hair. Her hands were marked with ink stains and calluses from years of drafting. Silas stood beside her. 63, silver-haired, still broad-shouldered, despite the cane he needed now for his bad shoulder and the old war wounds that ached in the rain. Nervous, he asked. No, Marlowe smiled. I've done scarier things than vote. When her turn came, she walked into the booth alone, marked her ballot, dropped it in the box. It was such a small thing, a piece of paper, a pencil mark, but it was hers, earned, not given. Outside the polling station, Silas was waiting with an umbrella. Dark clouds were gathering. Rain's coming, he said. I know. The first drops began to fall. Silas opened the umbrella and held it over both of them. They walked home through the rain together. After all these years, it still felt like the most natural thing in the world.